Good evening. I'm Marshall Johnson from Philadelphia. My background is similar to that of Drs. Prasad and Moore, but somewhat different also. I am not nearly the embryologist that either one of those two individuals is. My specialization is congenital malformations, that is birth defects, and most of my research is involved with grinding up very early embryos of various species and various kinds of developing systems to look at their biochemistry to try to figure out what is going wrong that causes abnormal development to take place. In order to do that, one must be somewhat familiar with at least experimental embryology. It's a real pleasure, and I thank the Muslim Students Association for inviting me here to join with these two gentlemen to try to shed a little bit of light here in the end of the 20th century on what some writings were over 1,400 years ago. I first went to work on this topic some 5 or 6 years ago when I was invited to Saudi Arabia to join Drs. Moore and Prasad. I was not prepped ahead of time. I have known these two individuals for some time, but when I arrived there, Sheikh Abdul Majid Zindani was prepared, and he had about 2 days of questions for me. And I sat and did the best I could to answer each of these questions with no idea what their origin was. It was subsequent to this that I was provided with a translated version of the Quran so I could sit in the following years and have the opportunity to read it. One cannot help but be struck that many things were known which could not have been known 1,400 years ago. Dr. Prasad, I think, just gave the best overview of this I have ever heard or read when he talked about the various stages. Those stages are rather precisely defined in the Quran, and in fact the Quran uses some stages or provides us with some stages which we've not been aware of before. When he speaks of the alaka and mudga stages, they are stages, and when one looks at it from hindsight, after having had these terms offered to you and the Quranic meaning provided for you, then as a morphologist, one can come back and say, yes, that is a stage. We hadn't recognized it as such. We've never had a definitive term to describe it before, but certainly here is a stage. When one talks about the bones then being clothed with flesh, and the word then is in there so often, and the thens are always in the proper sequence. And these are things which weren't known until about 200 years ago, supposedly. The idea that we are created from mixtures, that at a particular time the external genitalia are recognizable as a binary, the two sexes. Those kinds of things are rather interesting to read from a book which was recorded by a simple man, the Prophet, peace be upon him, writing these things where he would have supposedly no laboratory with which to see them, and if he had the laboratory, the tools to see them with had not been invented yet. An interesting aspect of this is a concept presented and espoused by Sheikh Zindani, and that is that many of the things which we today can recognize here in the 20th century, we can recognize these stages. We could not have recognized them 200 years ago. If the embryologists that existed 200 years ago had been asked to identify these stages and to describe them, it would not have been possible for them to do it. these kinds of things weren't known that recently. But similarly, in the experimental realm, there are still things which we are just now discovering. It has been in certainly your lifetimes, but because it's just in my lifetime, that we have come to understand a bit of what is described in the Quran as the program and the planning ahead, that things were determined and then it was just a program that played out. That's just since Watson and Crick have come along that we have understood how that program works. Dr. Moore mentioned that there are things which we don't understand. And for the past 2 years I've been working with one, and that is the idea of created from clay. Well, that's something which we don't understand today, but there is just beginning to appear in the peer-reviewed scientific literature ways, theories, not hypotheses, but testable theories, to the extent that various kinds of clays and silicas can form as an organizational matrix, which is not dissimilar to that, from that, which we would consider as the DNA template to do the kinds of things for the assemblage of and differentiation of cells, that clays can do the same kinds of things to put molecules into an organized configuration, so that then one could go to the first stage up from that, and that is a semi-permeable membrane or the cell membrane. So Dr. Prasad spelled out the sequence of events which are listed in the Quran. What Sheikh Zandani is talking about is the fact that we are part of that timeline. We are also on a timeline wherein some things we think we're very wise because we can describe them today. We can describe these translations today. We couldn't have done it 200 years ago. There are other things which are written in the Quran which we just now are beginning to see, and others which we can't quite understand just yet. So for me, the kinds of things that Sheikh Zandani is working with us, and other scholars from the Islamic world are working, we're helping them, I guess, certainly, are the kinds of things which are certainly very intriguing. And to a scientist who is not a scholar in this area, doesn't even speak the language in which the book is written in, it's truly a remarkable kind of quest and a very exciting adventure that one wished one could live a few hundred years so you could see more of it as it's being played out. Thank you for being here tonight.